The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon as Hai, a homeless man, stood alone in the shadows of a desolate alley. His face, battered and swollen, told a story of violence. His body, once strong and capable, now bore the marks of a life abandoned by society. But as he lay in that cold, dimly lit jail cell, bloodied and broken, he wasn't just a man. He was a force waiting to awaken. The police had seen him only as another nameless figure, another black man wandering the streets, invisible to the world. They had no idea who Hai really was. They didn't know that beneath his ragged coat and tattered boots was a man with a deadly past. An ex-soldier, a sniper who had once held the lives of others in the crosshairs of his rifle. He was a ghost in the jungles and deserts, evading death itself. They beat him without mercy. Their words were laced with hate, their fists cruel and unrelenting. But in every strike, they unknowingly unlocked something inside him. His cold eyes, once dimmed by the weight of despair, began to gleam with something more dangerous: focus, precision, calculation. They thought they had crushed him. They thought they had broken him. But in doing so, they had awakened something they could never have anticipated. The predator inside Hai stirred, its senses sharpened by years of surviving in the deadliest of circumstances. They didn't realize it, but the game had just changed. What they saw as a man broken by their cruelty was in fact a soldier, silent, methodical, and deadly. The city had no idea what it had just unleashed. The real battle was about to begin. The air in the Alabama heat was suffocating, the cracked asphalt beneath Hai's feet reflecting the brutal sun like a frying pan. He had long forgotten the feeling of comfort, of warmth not just from the weather, but from a sense of belonging. For years, he had wandered the streets, forgotten by most, invisible to a world that had cast him aside. His days were consumed with one goal: survival. Hai's body had grown accustomed to the hunger, the exhaustion, and the solitude. His clothes, ragged, once bright military surplus that had long lost their color, hung loosely around his broad frame. Each tear in his jacket was a reminder of the battles he had fought, not in distant lands, but here on the streets, alone. The scars on his body told stories of jungle warfare, of desert storms, of ambushes and sniper fire. He was once a man of purpose, a sniper with steady hands and a clear aim. But now, he was nothing more than a scavenger, rifling through garbage piles in search of the scraps that others had discarded. A low rumble interrupted his grim search. The growl of a diesel engine, the telltale sound of a vehicle approaching. Hai didn't flinch. His trained instincts kicked in. He didn't need to see the vehicle to know it was trouble. A heavy truck or SUV, likely owned by the people who thought they had power, moving too fast through this forgotten part of town. He continued to sift through the garbage, as though he were just another invisible piece of the urban landscape. His hands, calloused from years of hard work, brushed a crumpled sandwich from the refuse. He inspected it for a moment, a grim, soldierly pragmatism. It wasn't much, but it would do. He slid it into the plastic bag he had scavenged earlier, securing it tightly, a small victory in his war against hunger. The tires of the vehicle crunched against the gravel as it came to a stop. Hai's peripheral vision caught the glint of a badge, a reminder that trouble had found him again. He could feel the eyes on him, even without turning his head. The slow, deliberate steps of men who owned the streets. Men who knew the law, or at least thought they did. The heavy footsteps drew closer. He kept his head down, but his ears were already mapping the sound. He could hear the swagger in their boots, He could hear their power in the way they walked, in the way they breathed. These were men who saw themselves as kings of this little corner of the world. High's body tensed, not from fear, but from a cold, methodical readiness. He knew how this would go. The first one spoke, his voice thick with a southern drawl, dripping with disdain. Well, look at this. A filthy scavenger. The man's words hit like a slap. Chief Nam stepped into view, towering over Hai. He was a hulking figure, his buzzed head and granite jawline betraying the kind of arrogance that came with unchecked power. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the searing light of the afternoon sun, concealing the malice in his eyes. The other officers flanked him, their presence like a wall of hostility. Their smirks were sharp and predatory, the kind that spoke of privilege and entitlement. Hai didn't move. His body was like a steel wire, taut with the kind of tension that only came from years of surviving in hostile environments. He met Chief Nam's gaze through the mirrored lenses, but he said nothing. Silence was his shield. Silence was the habit he had developed after being cast out by the military, after being discarded by the world. He had learned that sometimes saying nothing was more powerful than any words. The officers mocked him, their laughter like gravel grinding underfoot. Deputy Jax, the tallest one, spat tobacco juice onto the pavement, narrowly missing Hai's worn boots. The mockery was palpable, thick in the air. But Hai remained still, his heart beating steady in his chest, his eyes never leaving Chief Nam's face. "You don't belong here, boy," Chief Nam sneered, his voice dripping with scorn. The words were like venom, but Hai didn't flinch. "What are you doing here? Stealing from good folks?" "Just passing through," Hai answered, his voice low and even, each syllable carefully measured. He kept his hands visible, palms open, knowing that even the smallest gesture could be twisted into a threat. The deputies snickered at his calmness, their voices rising in ridicule. But Chief Nam wasn't satisfied. His sneer deepened, revealing yellowed teeth stained by years of cheap cigars. He stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Hai. He looked down at him, eyes full of venom. Deputy Jax landed the first blow, a punch to Hai's jaw that sent a rush of blood into his mouth. The metallic taste filled his senses, but he didn't cry out. He didn't flinch. He simply spat it out, watching the deputies with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who had stared death in the face too many times to be afraid of anything these men could do. One punch. Another, a baton strike to the ribs. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to what he had endured in foreign lands. They were amateurs. They didn't know what he had survived, what he had endured. But they didn't stop. They kept hitting him, each blow designed to bruise without breaking. And with every strike, they pushed him closer to the edge. Every blow fueled something darker inside him, something he had buried long ago, a predator that had lain dormant, but not for long. The assault continued, but Hai's stillness remained. He didn't beg for mercy. He didn't fight back. He simply watched, silently marking every mistake they made, every flaw in their technique. He was counting, and as their fists rained down on him, he counted them out. He was playing the long game. Because this wasn't the end. Not for him, and certainly not for them. The real fight was just beginning. The blows kept coming. Chief Nam's fist slammed into Hai's ribs with a sickening crunch, followed by a sharp, searing pain that spread across his chest. Deputy Jax landed another punch to his stomach, his boot coming down hard on Hai's shin. The pain was unbearable, and yet, Hai didn't scream. He didn't resist. His body, battered and bloodied, remained eerily still. The air around him felt thick, oppressive. The officers' mocking laughter and taunts filled the space like a storm cloud, their voices rising as their frustration grew. But Hai wasn't listening to the words. He wasn't focused on the pain. His mind was clear, cold, calculating. His senses were heightened, his sharp eyes watching every movement, every twitch, every breath of his attackers. His mind didn't focus on their violence. Instead, it focused on their weaknesses. He observed the way Deputy Jax gripped his baton, the way Officer Steele shifted his weight when he prepared to strike, the way Chief Nam's boots scuffed the ground as he took a step forward, his posture rigid with pride. Every small detail, every misstep, every movement was being catalogued in Hai's mind, as if his mind had turned into a sniper's scope, picking apart their every flaw with precision. Deputy Jax swung the baton once more, aiming for Hai's ribs. The blow came too wide, a clumsy arc, and Hai saw it before it even touched him. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply let the baton pass, barely grazing his side. The deputy's hand wavered slightly after the missed blow, a fleeting moment of hesitation. It was a crack in his confidence, a tiny sign of weakness. Hai didn't miss it. Chief Nam, growing impatient, grabbed Hai by the collar, lifting him slightly off the ground. His eyes were filled with contempt as he spat out, "What's wrong with you, boy? Too dumb to cry, too stupid to beg." The insult was meant to break him, to provoke a reaction. The blow that followed, a punch square to Hai's jaw, rocked his head to the side. Blood spilled from his split lip, staining his shirt. But Hai remained silent. In the distance, the faint sound of tires grinding on gravel barely registered to the officers, who were too focused on their power trip. They didn't see what was coming. Hai did. His mind remained perfectly calm. His breathing slowed, and he began to map out the attack pattern, each officer's rhythm, each strike's trajectory. Chief Nam's fury was growing, but his movements were sloppy, too aggressive, too predictable. The deputy who had delivered the kick to Hai's shin was breathing heavily, clearly tiring. His swings were slowing, becoming more erratic. Hai caught the pattern. They were getting sloppy. The officers didn't realize they were pushing him closer to the edge, closer to the moment when they would finally unleash something they couldn't control. They thought they were breaking him, but in reality, they were feeding his growing awareness, honing his senses, sharpening his focus. Every second was an eternity. The pain from the beatings, the pressure on his chest from Chief Nam's grip, the blood dripping down his face. All of it was just noise to him. His mind was a quiet storm, a quiet place where only the details mattered. His every thought was focused, narrowed down to the next step in his survival. He wasn't resisting, not yet. He was waiting. The sound of boots scraping against the gravel floor seemed to echo in his ears. A misstep from Officer Steele, too heavy, too sure of himself. A mistake. Deputy Jax, readying another strike with his baton, shifted his weight forward just a little too quickly, his stance vulnerable. It was all so clear to Hai. Each miscalculation, each mistake, laid out in front of him like the cracks in a dam about to break. His body tensed for a split second. It wasn't a movement, not yet, but his mind was already there. His eyes darted to Chief Nam's feet. The officer's stance was wide, his balance precarious. His body leaned too far forward. Deputy Jax was no longer watching his surroundings. He was too focused on the baton in his hand, ready to strike again. Then it came. A sudden push. Chief Nam, frustrated by the silence, threw another punch, this time with all his might. Hai allowed it to happen, letting the punch fly just a few inches past his cheek. But instead of collapsing, instead of flinching, he snapped into motion. He grabbed Chief Nam's arm in a fluid, practiced movement, twisting it in a way that sent the officer's own momentum crashing into him. Nam yelped, losing his grip on Hai's collar as he stumbled backward. The officers around him froze, momentarily confused by the sudden shift. For a split second, Hai was free. He didn't stand up. He didn't try to escape. His mind raced through the calculations of what to do next, of what they would do next. They would retaliate, of course. Deputy Jax would come at him with the baton again, but it would be sloppy, predictable. And Hai would be ready. He didn't need to resist yet. Not yet. But soon, very soon, the predator would rise. And when it did, there would be no mercy. The taste of blood was still sharp in Hai's mouth, the metallic tang that mixed with the dirt beneath him. His chest ached with every breath, his body bruised and broken, but the storm in his mind had never been clearer. As Chief Nam stumbled back, disoriented by the twist of his own arm, Hai's heart pounded in his ears. The moment they had created, the one they thought would break him, was slipping from their hands. For the briefest of moments, there was chaos. The officers were momentarily off balance, their eyes darting between Hai and each other. It was just enough for Hai to move. With a low grunt, he pushed off the ground, ignoring the searing pain that shot through his side. His hands were still slick with his own blood, but his mind was sharp as a blade, cold as a winter wind. He didn't waste time. He didn't waste energy. He just moved in a single, fluid motion. He slipped past Deputy Jax, who was still recovering from his missed baton swing, and darted toward the shadows of the nearby trees. The dense forest, just beyond the clearing, welcomed him like an old friend, wrapping him in its dark embrace. The crackling leaves underfoot, the soft rustle of branches overhead, it was all part of his world now. This was his element, a place he knew better than the back of his hand, a place where he could disappear. Behind him, he heard the officers shouting, their voices rising in confusion and anger. They hadn't expected him to slip away. They thought they had him, thought they had broken him. But what they didn't know was that they had only pushed him further into the darkness, deeper into the heart of his training, his instincts. They had no idea what they had awakened. The sound of heavy boots crashing through the underbrush echoed behind him. Chief Nam was shouting orders, but Hai didn't care. He was already a ghost in the woods, slipping between the trees, silent, like a shadow, leaving nothing behind but the whispers of the wind. His senses were alive. His ears pricked for every movement, his eyes scanning the shadows for every flicker of danger. He knew the forest, every crevice, every hidden path. He could hear the officers growing frustrated, their movements slowing, their calls growing more desperate. They were not soldiers. They were not trained to hunt. They were just men with guns, men who thought they could break him. And now they were lost in his world. But Hai couldn't afford to stop. He couldn't afford to rest. His body was battered, bloodied, but his mind was still sharp. The farther he got from them, the better his chances. They had no idea what kind of man they were dealing with. The predators were now the prey, and Hai wasn't going to let up. The forest had its own rhythm, its own language. Hai moved with it, stepping over roots, ducking under branches, his breathing steady despite the bruises, despite the fatigue. He could hear the helicopters now, the distant buzz of the blades slicing through the air. The spotlight from the chopper swept over the treetops, but it didn't reach him. Not yet. He kept moving. He had to. His muscles screamed in protest. His injured side burned with every breath. But there was no stopping now. He was too deep in this game, too far gone. He couldn't be caught. Not now. The officers were still searching, their voices growing fainter. Their steps were less confident, slower now. Deputy Jax was panting, his heavy breathing betraying the exhaustion he couldn't hide. Hai knew they were tiring. They weren't trained for this. They didn't know how to track a man who had been trained to disappear. He pushed forward, deeper into the wilderness, the shadows swallowing him whole. A small stream cut through the forest ahead, its murmur soft against the pounding in his chest. He moved toward it, slipping into the cool water and allowing it to wash over his wounds. The pain didn't subside, but the water masked it, numbed it for a moment. The blood in his mouth, the blood on his skin. It was all a reminder of the price he had paid. But it was also a reminder of what he had to do next. Up ahead, he could hear them now, more officers, more voices. They were regrouping, probably readying to spread out and cover more ground. Chief Nam was barking orders, and his tone was one Hai knew all too well. It was the tone of a man who was losing control, a man who was desperate. And desperation was dangerous. Hai slowed his pace, slipping behind a cluster of thick bushes. His breathing was shallow now, but controlled. He waited, listening. They were close, just on the other side of the stream. His eyes flicked from one shadow to the next. The forest had come alive, and he was part of it. He could feel the pulse of the land, the rhythm of the trees, the sway of the leaves. Every sound, every shift was a signal to him. He was ready. The officers passed within feet of him, unaware, blind to the man they were hunting. They didn't know that the tables had turned. They thought they were the predators, but now it was Hai who was in control. He waited for the perfect moment. The moment when they would be too focused, too unaware. Then, like a flash of lightning, he moved. He was a blur, darting across the stream, slipping behind another tree, just out of their reach. They were already too far behind. Too slow. Hai's escape wasn't just a flight. It was a declaration. He wasn't running from them. He was leading them deeper into the wilderness, further from the truth, further from the man they thought they knew. And with each step, with each breath, he was closer to something they could never comprehend. They were hunting the wrong man. And by the time they realized it, it would be too late. The night had fallen heavy over the Alabama woods, cloaking the land in a suffocating darkness. Hai's body was still broken, still wounded, but his mind was sharper than ever, burning with the cold fire of a man who had been pushed too far. He had evaded the police for hours now, slipping through the trees like a shadow, but the real danger was still out there, lurking in the heart of the town. Chief Nam had mobilized more than just his corrupt officers. He had called in the townspeople, too. The lynch mob, a bloodthirsty group of fanatics, was being stirred up by the sheriff's lies and hatred. Hai wasn't just running from the police anymore. He was fighting a battle on two fronts. The officers were bad enough, but the townspeople, they were dangerous in a way that couldn't be measured. They had no training, no discipline. They were raw, driven by fear and rage, and they would stop at nothing to capture him. The sound of footsteps and voices grew louder as the mob formed, their chants rising above the howling wind. Chief Nam's voice carried through the trees, authoritative, commanding. "We're not just going to bring him in. We're going to make him regret ever crossing us," he shouted, his voice thick with malice. His words sent a chill through Hai's bones. Nam wasn't just after a man. He was after something darker. Power, control. And Hai was the key to it all. Hai crouched low behind a cluster of bushes, his breathing shallow and controlled. He could hear them now, dozens of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, their movements clumsy, eager. The mob was closing in. The police were with them, too. Deputy Jax was in the front, his baton swaying at his side, his eyes darting around, unsure of what to expect next. He had been part of the beating earlier, a simple pawn in Chief Nam's game. But he had tasted the thrill of power, and now he was part of the hunt. Hai could see it in the way Jax moved, the way his hands twitched, eager for action, but unsure how to get it. He was nothing compared to the man Hai used to be, the man who had trained for a purpose, a mission. The mob and the police were closing in on him. But Hai wasn't worried. Not yet. He had spent years in the military, learning how to disappear, how to be a predator in a world that didn't know it was being hunted. The chaos of the mob worked in his favor. They were too loud, too impatient, too reckless. They were giving away their positions, moving in predictable patterns, fueled by fear and anger, while Hai was a calm eye in the storm, ready to strike. As the mob drew closer, Hai's body tensed, every nerve alert. He knew the game. They were trying to corner him, to flush him out like a wild animal. But Hai wasn't going to be so easy to trap. He waited for just the right moment. The moment when they were too close, too sure of themselves. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "There he is!" Hai's pulse quickened, but his body remained still. The moment had come in a single fluid motion. Hai moved, like a shadow slipping through the night. He darted out from his hiding place, moving swiftly and silently, his military training kicking in. Deputy Jax was the first to see him, his baton raised, his eyes wide with disbelief. But Hai was already past him, his hand gripping the deputy's arm with the precision of a scalpel. He twisted, forcing Jax to the ground in one swift motion. The deputy's head hit the dirt with a sickening thud, and he was out cold before he even knew what had happened. The mob screamed in panic as Hai moved like a wraith among them. A quick jab to the ribs, a swift kick to the knee, his strikes were fast, clean, surgical. They didn't know where he was coming from, didn't know what hit them. Fear spread through the crowd as they realized they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. But Chief Nam wasn't going to let this slip away. His voice rang out, cold and venomous. "Don't just stand there. Get him. Now." His orders were clear, sharp, but Hai could hear the tremor of fear beneath them. Nam was losing control, and it made him even more dangerous. The mob surged forward, trying to surround Hai. But Hai was faster than they could keep up with. He knew exactly where each of them was, knew the weaknesses in their formation. One by one, he picked them off, his movements graceful and fluid, a predator in its element. But even as he took down the first few, Hai could feel the weight of the situation closing in. The mob was vast, and they were relentless. They were getting closer now, too close, and with every man he took down, the fear and anger in their eyes grew stronger. This wasn't just a battle of strength anymore. It was a fight of wills, and Hai was getting tired. His body was worn from the beatings earlier, his wounds slowing him down. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. The chaos around him reached a fever pitch as more officers arrived, their guns drawn, their flashlights sweeping through the darkness. Chief Nam was right behind them, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is over. Surrender now and you'll get a fair trial," he shouted. But Hai knew better. He had no intention of surrendering to a man like Nam. Hai moved into the shadows, disappearing into the woods once more. The hunt had only just begun. The darkened woods whispered around Hai as he moved through the underbrush, his every sense alert, his every muscle coiled with tension. The adrenaline had begun to fade, but the bitter taste of betrayal lingered. He had fought and bled to escape the suffocating grip of Chief Nam's tyranny, but the truth, like a slow-burning fuse, had begun to reveal itself. The deeper Hai dug into the web of corruption surrounding the sheriff's office, the darker the secrets grew. It started with the whispers. Hai had overheard bits of conversation, hushed voices in alleys, murmurs between officers. At first, he thought it was just the usual street gossip, the kind that meant nothing. But soon, he realized it was more than that. The officers, led by Chief Nam, weren't just after him. They were involved in something far more insidious. Drug trafficking, smuggling, a network of corruption so vast that it bled into every corner of the city. Deputy Jax, who had been part of the brutal beating, was just a small cog in the machine. But Nam was the puppet master, pulling the strings, feeding his pockets with stolen money, while maintaining his iron grip over the city. Hai's breath caught in his chest. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any bullet wound. He had been deceived, his life turned upside down by a system that didn't care about right or wrong. It only cared about power and control. But Hai had always been a man of action, and now, with the truth in his hands, he had a new mission. To use the very tools Nam had abused to expose the sheriff's web of lies and destroy his power. He knew that if he was going to make this work, he had to be strategic. He couldn't fight this battle with guns or fists alone. No, he would fight with their own tactics, their own resources. The sheriff's department had files. They had intelligence. And Hai was going to turn that intelligence into a weapon. Using his military training, Hai infiltrated the sheriff's office late that night. The building was a fortress of corruption, but Hai moved like a ghost, silent, calculating, invisible in the darkness. He bypassed security cameras, picked locks, and hacked into the system with a precision he hadn't used since his days in the army. The information was there, buried under layers of bureaucracy, but it was there. Evidence of the drug trade, evidence of the money laundering, and there, buried deep within the files, were the names of powerful men. Men who had paid Chief Nam to keep quiet, to turn a blind eye to the blood-stained business they were running. That he compiled everything. The names, the evidence, the connections, and sent it to every journalist he could reach, every trusted contact he had. He knew the risk he was taking. Once the truth was out, Nam's empire would collapse. But so would Hai's life. He would be hunted, but at least he would have exposed the monster for what it was. The city would know. The people would know. And in the end, that was worth the risk. Hai retreated into the shadows, feeling the weight of what he had done settle on his shoulders. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about something bigger now. It was about justice. But the relief was short-lived. The moment the truth began to spread, the situation exploded. The city, already on edge from Hai's fugitive status, descended into chaos. Chief Nam's response was swift, brutal. He wasn't going down without a fight. As the files were exposed, his grip on the city tightened. His corrupt allies in the police force rallied to him, their loyalty bought with blood money, and soon the entire city became a battlefield. The streets were flooded with officers, armed civilians, and mercenaries hired by Chief Nam to suppress the uprising that was beginning to stir in every corner of the town. The once silent streets were now alive with the sound of gunfire, shouts, and sirens. Chaos reigned, and it was no longer just Hai running for his life. It was everyone who had ever been oppressed by the system, everyone who had ever been silenced by fear. They all knew the truth now, and the truth had a way of ripping apart the lies that held the world together. Hai watched from a distance as the violence unfolded. The streets he had once wandered aimlessly were now battlegrounds. People he had known, strangers, family, friends, were caught in the crossfire, suffering the consequences of the corrupt system Hai had tried so desperately to bring down. The betrayal stung deeper now. He had hoped to tear down Nam's empire with precision, with calculated moves, but the truth had unleashed a firestorm of destruction, and he wasn't sure he could control it. The police and the townspeople clashed in the streets. Chief Nam, once so confident, so untouchable, now appeared vulnerable. His empire was crumbling, and the people were no longer afraid of him. But it was too late. The city had been consumed by the conflict. Blood spilled in the streets, and the once quiet town was now a war zone. Hai's heart tightened as he watched the city he had once called home burn. Was it worth it? Was it worth unleashing this chaos to expose one man's corruption? He didn't know. He didn't have the answers. All he knew was that he had fought for truth, for justice, even when it felt like the world was collapsing around him. But in that moment, as the sounds of battle raged in the distance, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. A war not just for survival, but for the soul of the city. And Hai was right in the center of it all, with nothing left to lose. The city burned, its streets painted with the fire of violence, the echoes of gunshots reverberating through every corner. Hai had seen conflict before. His life had been one long struggle, first in the jungles of war, then in the alleyways of a broken city. But this was something else. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice. It was a battle for the very soul of the place he had once called home. In the days since the truth had come to light, Hai had fought in the shadows, striking from the edges, hitting hard, taking down Chief Nam's enforcers. But as the chaos spread, so did the stakes. Chief Nam had no intention of going down quietly. He wasn't just losing control of his corrupt empire, he was losing his grip on power, and he would do anything to stop it. Hai had anticipated resistance, but not this. The streets were now teeming with mercenaries, hired guns, private soldiers who answered to no law but money. The kind of men who killed for sport, for profit, for the highest bidder. And Chief Nam, now desperate, had spared no expense. These mercenaries weren't here to capture him. They were here to kill him. A chill ran down Hai's spine when he saw them. Their black-clad figures, moving like shadows through the streets. The men were armed to the teeth, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes cold with the indifference of men who had never cared about the cost of life. Hai knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, and yet he wasn't afraid. Fear had long since abandoned him. This wasn't about fear. This was about survival. This was about taking down the monster that had poisoned the city from the inside out as the mercenaries closed in. Hai's mind raced. He could feel the weight of the decision that was about to come. There was no way he could fight them all, not head-on. But Hai had never been one for direct confrontation. He was a sniper, tactician. He was always 2 steps ahead. And in that moment, as the mercenaries approached, guns drawn and ready, Hai knew exactly what he had to do. He had learned, during his time in the military, that the key to survival wasn't just strength. It was the ability to think faster, to use the environment to your advantage, to manipulate the world around you like a weapon. And now, his city, had become his battleground. He was ready to use it in a blur of motion. Hai ducked behind an abandoned vehicle, his mind already calculating his next move. He could hear the mercenaries closing in, their footsteps heavy on the cracked pavement. A moment of silence passed, and then the air was split by the sharp crack of a gunshot. Hai had fired first, his bullet finding its mark in the chest of one of the mercenaries. The man dropped instantly, and chaos erupted. Hai moved fast, quicker than the mercenaries could react. He was a blur of motion, taking out one after another with precision and skill. He used the terrain to his advantage, climbing over obstacles, slipping between the narrow alleys, luring them into traps, using their own recklessness against them. He didn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop. For every mercenary he took down, another one appeared. And every time he thought he was close to victory, the stakes only got higher. But with every victory, Hai felt the price of his actions weighing on him. He had taken down part of Chief Nam's criminal empire, exposed the web of corruption that had festered under the surface for so long. He had made an impact, but with that impact came consequences. The people he had fought to protect, those he had once called family, friends, were now caught in the crossfire. The streets were littered with the bodies of those who had dared to stand with him, to stand against the corruption. He could feel their loss like a wound in his chest. Hai's heart was heavy, the weight of his choices bearing down on him. The city he had tried to save was now a war zone, its streets filled with the debris of destruction, its people torn apart by the very system he had fought to bring down. He had destroyed Nam's empire, but in doing so, he had destroyed everything else, too. The corruption had spread so deep, so wide, that taking down one man, one system, had only made way for a new battle to emerge. But Hai didn't have time to mourn. The mercenaries were closing in. Chief Nam was not finished. Hai knew the war wasn't over. Not yet. He had given everything to this fight. His body, his soul, his very identity. The city was burning around him, and he had no way of knowing if he could save it. But he had to try, because in the end, it wasn't about saving the city. It was about something deeper, about redemption, about justice, about the belief that even in the darkest of times, a single person could make a difference. And as the final wave of mercenaries charged toward him, Hai knew one thing for certain. He would not go down without a fight. He would fight until his last breath, no matter the cost. Because in a world that had lost its way, he was the last man standing between the darkness and the light. The smoke had cleared, the fires had begun to die down, and Hai stood in the center of it all, his body broken but his spirit unyielding. The city, once a place of his pain and his purpose, was now a wasteland, a reflection of the battle he had fought and the cost it had come to bear. The echoes of gunfire had faded, but the weight of what he had done, and what he had lost, lingered in the air. Chief Nam was in handcuffs, the weight of his crimes finally catching up to him. The man who had once held the city in an iron grip, using it for his own gain, was now nothing more than a prisoner. His face filled with disbelief and anger. The truth about his criminal activities, about the network of corruption that had poisoned the city for so long, was out in the open. The media, the people, and the justice system had finally awakened to the monstrous reality of what had been happening under their noses. For a brief moment, Hai thought it was over. The war was won. But that was the lie that kept him moving forward. As the dust settled and the world began to rebuild, Hai looked around at the destruction. The streets he had fought to protect were now nothing more than rubble. The people he had hoped to save, the ones who had stood by him, were gone. The cost of exposing the truth, of standing up to the corruption that had infiltrated every level of power, had come at an unimaginable price. Hai had won, yes, but in winning he had lost everything. The city was in ruins, its soul broken, and Hai was left to pick up the pieces of a life that could never be repaired. He had exposed Chief Nam for the criminal he was. He had destroyed the network that had controlled the city for years. But in doing so, he had shattered the very foundation upon which his world had been built. The streets were filled with the bodies of those who had tried to help him, those who had fought for justice alongside him. Their sacrifice had been in vain because justice, it seemed, always came with a price. And that price was more than Hai could have ever imagined. The truth, he realized too late, was not always enough to save a city. It was not enough to restore the lives that had been lost, the families torn apart, or the peace that had been shattered. The systems of power, of corruption, ran deeper than anyone had imagined. They were not so easily undone by one man's will. And now, as the sun set over the broken city, Hai was left standing alone, a victor without a reward, a man whose righteousness had cost him everything he had ever loved. There was no ceremony, no grand recognition for his efforts. The world moved on, and Hai was left to witness the aftermath. Chief Nam may have been behind bars, but the corruption he had created lived on, festering in the hearts of others who sought to replace him. The war wasn't truly over. It was just beginning again in a different form. But the battle had been won, and that, at least, was a small victory. In the end, Hai realized something far more important than the cost of the battle he had fought. Justice wasn't always about winning. It wasn't always about getting the recognition you deserved, or seeing the world change in an instant. Sometimes justice was about standing up, fighting for what's right, and accepting that there would always be sacrifices along the way. The true cost of justice wasn't measured by the lives it saved, but by the lives it broke. And sometimes the greatest warriors, the ones who fight the hardest for what's right, are left with nothing but their convictions. This battle wasn't about restoring peace. It was about reminding the world that even when the system is broken, even when it feels impossible to fight against, there are always those who will stand, who will fight, and who will speak the truth. And in that, there is a kind of victory. The road ahead was uncertain, but Hai knew that he had done what he could. The world wasn't fair, but the fight for justice didn't end with one man's sacrifice. It continued in the hearts of those who dared to ask the hard questions, who refused to turn away from the darkness. So, as the credits of his story began to roll, Hai whispered one final thought. The world had its flaws, its injustices, and its pain, but as long as there were people willing to fight for the truth, there was hope. Hope that one day, the cost of justice would be worth it. If you enjoyed this gripping journey of justice, sacrifice, and redemption, please make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and make us think about the world around us. Every story has a lesson, And with your support, we can continue to bring you the tales that matter. Stay with us, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that leave you questioning everything.